In the brutal air war over Europe in World War II, the death toll was high on all sides. This is German ace Heinrich Ehler, the man who went out in the most memorable way possible. When the war began in 1939, the young Ehler was actually serving in the anti-aircraft artillery for Germany. But shortly after the opening salvos of the war, he would join the Luftwaffe and would be assigned to the Messerschmitt Bf 109 in JG7 and then in JG5. These units would see him fighting on the Arctic front in Norway and then in northern Russia. Here, Ehler and the rest of his squadron would primarily fight against the Soviets. Like many of the great German aces, he would see a great deal of success against the Eastern adversaries. During this time, the German Luftwaffe was far superior to the Soviet air forces in aircraft, training, and strategy. So, for nearly all of 1942, Heinrich Ehler would dominate, as he racked up a total of 40 kills by the conclusion of that summer. As his victories continued, he would surpass 60 by the end of September, and by the following summer, in May of 1943, Ehler would tally his 100th kill, becoming the 40th German ace to surpass the century mark. This earned him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with Oak Leaves, which was presented in person by Adolf Hitler. He would thereafter go on to showcase his excellence in the air, and by the end of 1944 would eventually claim more than 200 kills. But it should be noted that there is some debate as to his kill count. According to many historians, the claims for his unit, and especially for Ehler in particular, have likely been inflated. This conclusion can be seen when comparing his claims to that of the Soviet records for aircraft lost. Thanks to the aid of some German history experts in a Messerschmitt history group, I was able to get a look at what one of these loss reports might look like. But since I'm assuming that, like me, most of you cannot read Russian, I have instead translated the data from their findings in one of these loss reports from this mission on May 26th. You can see that although on this day JG5 and Ehler claimed 33 kills, the Soviet loss report indicates that only 14 planes were written off. And even still, 5 of those were listed as being taken down by flak, not air combat. So even if we do include the flak hits, there were only 6 total twin-engine bombers reported as lost, which pales in comparison to the 20 that JG5 claimed during this sortie. Obviously, based on this information, it is clear that Heinrich Ehler and his unit likely overclaimed by a substantial number. But even with these records accounted for, it is still clear that he was a very skilled pilot and ace. Historians estimate that after Soviet records are taken into consideration, a more accurate kill count for Ehler is likely around 150 instead of the 208 that he claimed at the end of the war. But as Heinrich had showed that he could handle the Soviets with ease in the skies over the Eastern Front from 1942 to 1944, in early 1945 that would change, as he was sent to the west for the defense of the Reich. Here, he would find that his enemy was not quite so easily killed, and it would be here that he would utter his famous and unforgettable last words. As the calendar turned to 1945, the Americans were increasing the intensity of their heavy bombing campaign and were wreaking devastation all over Germany. And many of the other top aces from the East were sent to defend against the B-17s and B-24s that filled the skies over the Reich. Here, with JG7, he would be assigned to the newly operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262. With incredible speed and a lethal armament of cannons in the nose, Germany was hopeful that this new fighter would be a formidable bomber killer, and that it may save them from the heavy American Air Force. Over the next month, Ehler would fly the 262 with some success, claiming 3 B-17s, 2 B-24s, and a P-51 Mustang on a handful of missions. At this time, however, Ehler and JG7 were, in many respects, the last hope for Germany, so they would have to do everything they could to halt the Allied forces nonetheless. And on April 4th of 1945, Heinrich Ehler would do just that. On this date, the famed German ace would be scrambled to intercept a massive force of American bombers. Little did Ehler know that this would be his final mission. After taking off and climbing to an adequate altitude to set up his intercept, Ehler and his flight dove in, unloading their cannons on the formation of American B-17s. According to combat records, he shot down 2 flying fortresses to bring his final claim to 208 aerial victories. But then, as he pulled the trigger to try and destroy a third, his cannons ceased firing. He had exhausted all of his ammunition. It was at this moment that Heinrich Ehler realized that his fight was over and that he was not turning back to base with enemy bombers still in the air. He was tired and, according to his wingmen, had reportedly lost the fire in his heart and knew what fate likely awaited his beloved Germany. What happened next would be an act of hatred, anger, and vengeance. Vengeance against more than just the enemy, likely against life itself. In a final eerie and haunting radio transmission that was heard by his wingman as well as the commanders in the operations room, Heinrich Ehler called out,
"Theo, Heinrich here. Have just shot down 2 bombers. No more ammunition. I'm going to ram him. See you in Valhalla."
There is little documented evidence of the events that followed, as no German airmen reported seeing it occur. But what we do know is that Ehler never returned from this mission and made no additional transmissions following those famous last words. Thus, the obvious conclusion is that the German ace pointed his jet fighter directly at an enemy bomber and flew right into his enemy, killing himself and the American crew as well in a final act of devotion and resentment. It would be a tragic ending for one of Germany's most esteemed aces. Heinrich Ehler's body would be found the following day near Berlin. He would finish as one of the highest scoring aces in the Luftwaffe and was buried in a small grave in Germany. The young airman was 27 years old.